Thomas and Betsy here for the American Intelligence Media. Thomas, you haven't had anything to report to us in a while, and I hear that you and the conclave have been very busy doing some deep dive into the whole Uranium One situation. Would you like to take it from here and just tell us what you guys have found?
Well, Betsy, it's shocking. One of our conclave members actually has multiple degrees in engineering, nuclear engineering, and was involved with these things firsthand, as well as some of them, of course, are retired military, and so on and so forth. So this had to be kicked around to make sure that we actually had the story right. Recently, I did one audio with you on Uranium One, which has gone very far, and a lot of people have listened to it and responded. So let me just start off by saying what the point of this video is. It's to talk about Uranium One, but it's also to talk about the entire nuclear con game. Because this isn't going to stop with Hillary Clinton. Actually, the story we all know is well known because of Clinton Cash, that she took $145 million from individuals involved in the nuclear industry in Russia and also in Canada, and the people who created this con game of Uranium One and gave it to the foundation. Well, first off, that was done with almost $2 billion to the illegal Clinton Foundation, which was an extension of the Clinton Library, which is all of it is a fraud. And we're going to go over that in great detail today. As a matter of fact, this is the first time, Betsy, you've ever seen me bring notes.
No, folks, Thomas is always extemporaneous, and I'm sitting here looking at several pages of notes. So this video might go a little longer, but it'll be worth it, I'm sure.
Well, hopefully I've memorized the stuff so that I don't have to look at the page, but the deal is it's so complicated that it took our entire group to really understand it. That is because you have to have a historical perspective in relationship to how uranium has come into this country, who runs the entire uranium industry, in other words, the nuclear industry, both nuclear power plants and nuclear missiles, and what is our relationship to Russia in terms of this. It will shock people if they get crazily shocked, like their head is going to explode and their eyes are going to pop out of their head, because they say, why would we have anything to do with Russia and uranium? Then they haven't been awake since 1993. The older guys in our conclave, which is all of them.
You are all old guys.
All remember being angry about these things when they did come out, because this is historic since 1993. So we have to go back and talk about George Bush Sr. and his uranium deal with Russia. So I got to lay this out in parts, which again, you've never heard me do this, create an outline for the talk, but this is the way that it needs to go. First off, show how it's a con game. Second off, talk about the deal that started with George Bush Sr. and the way that uranium and gold is nothing more than continuing to fleece the world. It used to be oil, but now Clintons have gone beyond George Bush. Of course, remember George Bush basically created Bill Clinton. And it was Averell Harriman who literally plucked him out of nowhere and made Bill Clinton a Rhodes Scholar, who then went to Russia during the year that he was doing his internship. And he's the only Rhodes Scholar in history who failed the program and still, to this day, brags that he's a Rhodes Scholar. So we're talking about sheer corruption. When we're talking about George Bush Sr., remember, it has continued from George Bush Sr., his patsy, Bill Clinton, and then Bill would have gone on for longer had he not been impeached. But then, of course, his own son, and then Obama. What we have here is one continuous stream of what you would call a type of CIA mafia. And what they have done with Russia is just horrible. And we've talked about it so many times. The takedown of the USSR was done by George Bush Sr. And the fall of the the second time Russia was fleeced, it was also under the direct aegis of George Bush Sr. So what we have in America, and then I will go into the Uranium One deal. And the Uranium One deal is very complicated, and all we have is general information being given out by someone who is the lawyer of the asset that was used by the FBI in a sting operation that didn't stop the corruption, the extortion, the money laundering. It let it go on until the program was done. That's what Robert Mueller and Rod Rosenstein, who was particularly in control of that, and Comey. This has all been contrived for a long time. Remember, it was Mueller who delivered in 2009 to Putin a sample of our uranium from Wyoming so that he would decide whether he, since he now owned 16% of the company that got the uranium deal in Wyoming, it was a Canadian company. It was started off called Eurasia. Then it turned into, it merged with ARMS, and then it turned into Uranium One, and then it was sold to Putin directly and the Kremlin in Rosatom, which is an agent of their Nuclear Regulatory Commission, basically. So what we really have is Mueller. Now people are crying out. There was even a motion in Congress from Gates to have Mueller step down or be fired because of his own connection to Uranium One. And you cannot look at Russian collusion with the election without looking at Uranium One, seeing that it was still going on during that time and that this is a huge issue. For instance, people basically yell, news commentators yell and get upset when they say, why are we doing uranium deals with Russia? So let's just get to the brass tacks of it. You have to go back in time to realize that we gave our nuclear program to the Russians. We handed it to them. At that time, remember, we've never been at war with Russia, and in World War I and II, they were our ally, and we helped them tremendously. We made sure that they got oil. We made sure they got all the supplies they needed. They were our ally. So the idea that we go into a Cold War with someone that we've never been in a war with is stupid. It's not believable. It is a sham. And the reason that it has to happen is because the military-industrial complex, which I know is a catchphrase, but let's just call it military contractors for the United States of America, who are also military contractors for every other country in the world. They're not our friends. Our military contractors aren't our friends, and they're not Americans. They're transnationalists, they're internationalists, what they call globalists. And they're only about greed, and they're gangsters, and they're about basically ripping off the American government for all they can. And so that's the baseline here. So why would we have an enemy like Russia, that we continue to support them in their space program? Remember, who are we in space with? Russia. They have all of our technology. We give it to them. Many of us in the conclave witnessed this happen even when we were in the military back in the 70s. We gave them the technology so they could compete with us in satellites and communication and nuclear weapons, and you name it. In the economy, it doesn't matter. We had to have an enemy. That's the way that it works. It's called Clash of Nations, and to continue your dominance, you have to have, of course, these nuclear deterrents, so that if one leader pushes the button, the other pushes the button, and we're all dead. Hey, if one pushes the button, we're all dead anyway. If a few nuclear hydrogen bombs go off near the ocean, that could cause a reaction that they have speculated on for a long time. 2 or 3 near an ocean with enough deuterium, tritium available, and you could have a chain reaction. The whole Earth could become a hydrogen bomb. Would any leader do that? No, they would not. So then why do we spend, and hang on to your hat, I hope you're sitting down, I'm going to tell you some sad realities. At the height of the Cold War, Russia had 44,000 nuclear warheads aimed at us. Each one of those warheads, in today's terms, cost basically just the uranium-235 and plutonium-239 in most of those warheads, and some of them had multiple warheads on each nuclear missile. Each warhead, each nuclear warhead, costs approximately, right even to this day, right now, let's use today's figures, $50 million per missile. That doesn't count the missile. That counts just the radioactive material in it. Uranium-235, plutonium-239. It costs about, for America, let's use American terms, it costs about $10 million a year to maintain them. So even once you drop, say, $50 million per missile, you still have to spend $10 million or more, and if you count the silos and their maintenance and the whole system and the electronic system, as much as $20 million per missile. Now, at one point, Russia had about 44,000. We had 55,000, with many of them MIRVs on them, multiple individually targeted reentry vehicles. In other words, for multiple, nobody knows how many warheads on one missile. So when we say we had 44,000, that doesn't mean we had 44,000 nuclear bombs. We could have had many more of that, multiples of that. But that's what we had. So the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty backed that off to 7,000 in Russia, 900 in China. We'll talk about China in a minute. 7,000 equally in America. So we now have 7,000 of these. Okay, now I can't do the math. If there's someone out there that can multiply 50 million times 55,000, that's just the base cost. That's not the cost of maintenance. It's not the cost of building the facilities. It's not the cost of, what do they call it? When they downgrade them, when they upgrade them, when they decommission them, and when they dismantle them,
and
which
not
is
to
a
mention
fortune.
the ordinary and customary infrastructure costs that are associated with building structures like that.
Yes, this entire nuclear weapons industry costs more than anyone can imagine if it was all calculated. Now, you can say, well, that's very good. So then, but wait a second, it only takes one ICBM with a MIRV on it to ruin America's day. One. If one gets through out of the 7,000 that are still pointed at us, ready to go, if one gets through, or if one of ours gets through, that's the end of Russia, that's the end of America. Now, has anyone thought this through? So why do we need 7,000 of them? So, because it's a con game. Now, here's let's just get to the point. The point is, the bottom line here is, America, when we closed Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which is where we created the enriched uranium-235 for supposedly the 2 nuclear bombs we dropped on Japan, and then also the stuff we needed for our nuclear power plants. When that was decommissioned, there was one opened up in Paducah, Kentucky, which now, when it was operative and it closed down 3 years ago, it produced 85% of the world's enriched 235 uranium. In other words, America had basically the monopoly on it. At this moment, we produce none. Zero, folks. Zero. Who is the number one nuclear, enrichment of 235, uranium-235 in the world? That would be the Queen. Who's the number two? That would be Putin. Now let's remember that the Queen set up imperialism, and when I say the Queen, I'm literally talking about the fact that the British Commonwealth owns, of course, they own and run, whether they admit it or not, and the Queen does own and run all of the British Commonwealth, whether anyone admits it or not. That's the truth. That can be proven, has been proven many times. She owns Rio Tinto. Rio Tinto is the number one owner of uranium in the world. Because why? The number one place for uranium is Australia in the British Commonwealth. Third place is Canada, Saskatchewan, which is British Commonwealth. Number two is Kazakhstan. That would be, what shall I call him today? I will call him oligarch. He is the Russian godfather of the mafia oligarchs.
And this is the one whose name you will not mention.
No, that's Putin.
Oh, you're saying this is Putin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, he does have a friend who's the richest oligarch. If you mention his name, you die.
Okay, so we won't mention his name.
But I could mention other aspects of him. But the point is, all the oligarchs own different sections of what were national parts of Russia and USSR. And so when Goldman Sachs went in there and did these deals, they made oligarchs who control certain industries. Like there's one in control of aluminum. There's one in control of their gold. There's one in control of... Putin is personally in control of uranium and oil, and he's the head oligarch, and they say he's the richest man in the world. I would debate that. I'd say the Rothschild family, if you looked at the Rothschild family, would be the richest, with the Queen following behind, and Putin would be not too far behind that. But the point is that you're dealing with Putin, you're dealing with the most ruthless mafia don in history. Hands down, I would have to say yes. I will stand by that statement. Now, who was it that created this first? Well, first off, do you get the point? Nuclear power plants also do not need any uranium-235. They can run off of thorium. They can all be refitted very inexpensively to run off of a very common element instead of the most rare element on the Earth. Uranium-235 enriched is $140,000 an ounce.
But as long as we, the people, don't know that, they can run uranium with their con game and continue to enrich their coffers.
And most Americans would think, oh, you're so silly. Thomas, you're so silly. Nuclear power plants are owned by America, and we control every speck of uranium, and we don't buy uranium from anybody else, and we certainly do not make uranium for other countries, and especially not our enemies. You would be incorrect on all of those points.
Well, our audience is pretty savvy to that, Thomas.
No, they are not. Hardly anyone knows this, Betsy. Hardly anyone knows that the corporations that own the 99 nuclear facilities in America are not owned by America, and they're not owned by Americans. But they have fancy names like the Louisiana Energy Service, and it sounds like they're owned by the state. Sometimes they own part of them, but they're actually owned by multinational corporations, most of which are the number one owner is, of course, Britain. The number two owner, of course, as always, the Netherlands, and the number three owner, Germany. That has been true since the time of the imperialistic takeover of the world, and when the imperialists were more powerful than Germany, Netherlands, or Britain, even when they all joined together. The British East India Company, in the end, became more powerful than the Dutch East India Company, which became more powerful than the German bankers who started the first India trading companies. Those are all corporations. So now corporations rule the world, and those corporations have never ended. And the Civil War, the American Revolution was about in the North, was supported by the British East India Company, and they thought they owned the North, and the Dutch, through their slavery and their shipping of tobacco and cotton, thought that they owned the South. So this was a war between the British East India Company and the Dutch East India Company. That goes on to this very day. And that's who's fighting this war that I'm going to tell you about, the Uranium War. Barack Obama has come out, and during his time, he made sure that we not only ended our own the largest uranium-235 enrichment plant in the world, producing 85% of the world's enriched uranium-235 for nuclear power plants, but he made sure that these corporations that own nuclear power plants fell into the hands of multinationalists. Because he changed the laws. He also went to Congress in 2008 and 2010 and lobbied Congress to allow basically excuse his crime of allowing basically Putin and his company ARMZ, called Arms Uranium, to buy 16% of Eurasia Uranium, which is owned by Frank Giustra, Bill Clinton's best friend, who's on the Clinton Foundation and has donated $31 million to different Clinton initiatives, and $100 million to the Clinton Giustra Sustainability Fund, a sustainability initiative, which is, they say their purpose is to take the wealth of mining and give it to those in poverty, which they have not done one penny of that. Giustra gave $100 million to that fake company, along with Carlos Slim gave $100 million, and then Giustra promised half of his income for the rest of his life from all of his mining companies. His mining company, which he owns outright, Gold Corp, fourth largest producer of gold in the world. He learned these tricks in England, working for the Queen, basically. And he was a Merrill Lynch trader, and he's very corrupt. So when we talk about Uranium One, we got to talk about Frank Giustra. But right now we have to mention that Bill Clinton has known, like all of the presidents, that we've been in bed with Russia. And I'm not talking about a conspiracy. I'm talking about openly. For instance, in 1993, there was an amazing thing that happened that hardly any American knows about. It is called the Highly Enriched Uranium Purchase Agreement. It's also called the United States Enrichment Corporation Privatization Act of 1996, and it's also called the Uranium Enrichment Enterprise. It's a corporation that stood in between Russia and America so that we could buy we could buy uranium-235, highly enriched uranium-235 from nuclear missiles that were decommissioned and disassembled by Russia when the USSR collapsed and its satellite countries Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, they sent back the missiles. So Russia had 44,000. They went down to 7. So they decommissioned them. They had tons and tons of uranium. So George Bush Sr., in his last 2 years in office, went to Russia and said, hey, let's do a deal. Why don't we buy your uranium at, as I said, when it's enriched at that, the cost is $140,000 an ounce. George Bush Sr. bought 500 tons of enriched 235. When it goes from being 98% into low enriched uranium to 5%, it's a multiple of that. So we bought 50 tons for $8 billion, and it was a 20-year project where we brought it in to America, brought it to our gaseous diffusion plant at Paducah, Kentucky, and after Russia had taken it out of its missiles, they changed it from highly enriched to low enriched, which is a very expensive process. I don't believe for 1 second that even happened myself personally, but this is the story. This was the agreement. So they would degrade it or de-enrich it down to 5%, send it over to us because you can't ship this stuff when it's high grade because it's military weapons grade. 235, it's illegal to ship this stuff across borders of countries, let alone across the ocean. So they had to degrade it. Now, remember, Russia had at that time the second richest uranium mines in the world, and they had two of the largest enrichment plants in the world in Russia. So, were we really getting uranium-235 changed from HEU to LEU? Is that really what we got? Or did we just get stuff from the mine because they have basically pretty much an endless supply? Matter of fact, even once they did all of this and sold us 500 tons, they still have 1,000 tons of uranium-235 enriched, which is, of course, much, much more when it's not enriched and used in nuclear power plants. So basically, they have enough to last them, 50 years without digging up any. So when they have this excess from the missiles, and this is a con game that America wants to buy it from Russia, you have to smell a rat. This is a terribly bad plot they had. But this is the way that it went down. In 1993, George Bush got Congress to approve of this. They created this act. In 1994, Bill Clinton signed the act, and Bill Clinton was part of this. But to stand in between, because it was illegal to do, the deal was illegal to do because of all of the laws concerning nuclear material, what's called fissile material that can be made into weapons. They were all basically set aside for this deal. And for 20 years, from 1994 to 2014, 500 tons of this was brought into America that had been de-enriched. It was then made sure that it was enriched and ready, and then it was re-enriched, and then it was sent to our own facilities as well as whatever needs we had for all kinds of radioisotopes and other such things. So in other words, when they say 20% of our uranium is in that 35,000 acre out there in Wyoming, which, by the way, was owned by a single person until the fancy deals of seizing land, which we saw again and again during the Obama administration, and also during the Bush administration, we see seizing of land which was then used to be sold to our enemies, to basically mafia oligarchs who came in this country and took over our shipping industry of uranium in this country, lied and cheated, used the only legal shipping company for uranium in America, put their stuff on their own trucks, and with Obama's demand of the Congress, allowed them to ship it out of the country and then back into the country for absolutely no reason. As a matter of fact, let me explain that. There would be no reason to ship any uranium out to Canada. They don't have any enrichment facilities. They have refinement facilities, but that isn't what was needed. Enrichment facilities, even if they took it to Canada to refine it, that's stupid. Why wouldn't they refine it here and then enrich it here? It makes no sense. And so now what do we find out? That there are two trucking companies, and that even the FBI, with what they have leaked out to the lawyer through the informant and what they have also leaked out through other sources. Try to make it sound like Obama needed, let's remember, uranium coming into this country or going out of this country needed George Bush's, well, at the time, it needed Bill Clinton's approval and a number of committees. Now those committees are called the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS, you hear it referred to as, the Department of Commerce, the Department of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the International Atomic Commission. You needed so many sign-offs. But for instance, when they say that Hillary was responsible for this deal, uranium, no, this is going on for years and years. This was just Bill Clinton working with his buddy to be the middleman. So the middleman corporation for Bush was the United States Enrichment Corporation, which is owned by who? The same people who own all the defense contractor companies. It's the same old boys. And that's who Bush worked for when he went to the Carlyle Group immediately after being the president, and 1 year later became a board member of Barrick Gold, which is all fake gold. So he had already ripped off the oil from Russia through the Azerbaijan Chamber of Commerce with his friends at Halliburton, through Dick Cheney, through Henry Kissinger, James Baker, and all the other, Scowcroft and the other Vulcans, who to this very day, what they started in Azerbaijan is still the headquarters of the CIA in Eurasia. To this very day, Silkway Airlines is shipping weapons to Syria and to ISIS and to Al-Qaeda. That's the way it's been since George Bush started that after the fall of the USSR. They took over the satellite, at least this particular one, Azerbaijan. They took it over, they got the oil, they tried to take the oil, they tried to take the gold, and in the end, they did a uranium deal. So on his way out, George Bush did a uranium deal and a gold deal. The gold deal was to sell 2 dead gold mines to Barrick Gold that then became, oh, that's right, the #1 gold producer in the world. What a coincidence. And then with Carlyle Group, the 400 defense contractors that were working under the banner of the Carlyle Group, like KBR, like Halliburton, like all the people who got the contracts in Iraq, half the soldiers in Iraq were mercenaries who were hired by Carlyle Group. And that Carlyle Group, who sat on the board? Who was the major person on the board? George Bush Sr. So while his son was creating a second war in Iraq, Daddy Bush was cleaning up. This is what past presidents do when they're criminal CIA. Remember, George Bush was a CIA operative for Zapata during the Bay of Pigs and also during the assassination of JFK. He was deeply involved. Everyone should know that.
And he didn't just hang up his CIA operations and then go do something else. This just kept on, kept building, kept getting more evil and more entrenched, right?
Absolutely. And what he did with uranium, because it's the most expensive substance. He also wanted to trade in plutonium. He wanted the Russian plutonium. What would we need it for? We have 44,000 missiles down to 7. Most of those 44,000 that were not left have yet to even be, they're decommissioned, but they're not dismantled. We have enough uranium-235. If you go to the U.S. documents, here's the truth of the matter. We have some 30,000 missiles that have yet to be dismantled. We have more than enough uranium to last for 100 years, uranium-235. We then have, in our own stores of uranium, Russia has 6,000 tons left of uranium-235. We have 600 tons left. So that mixed with the missiles, we have enough uranium to last forever. Why would we let all uranium in this country be controlled by the Queen and Putin?
You know, it's interesting because it looks that they're throwing Hillary under the bus right now and making her the scapegoat for all this. But out here, we're not going to forget that this thing is bigger than Hillary Clinton.
Look, to say Russian collusion is stupid. The reset button with Hillary and Obama, they actually changed the nuclear laws so that Uranium One could happen. The reset button said, we're going to give you our technology all again, but this time we're doing it openly. Here, you big 3 tech companies, give billions. Go build plants in Skolvoko. And the tech city outside of Moscow, which we basically had these companies, U.S. companies, go over and build this for them so that they could. Raytheon now has its own facility there building supersonic missiles, which they don't even build for us. So same thing for China. We went over there. We opened it up. Who did that? The Clintons. And they did it because they got on the Walmart, basically started running our manufacturing in this country. And she was getting a piece as a paid member of the board of Walmart, which became one of the largest corporations in the world. So the past presidents set up corruption for the rest of their life because they want to become oligarchs like Putin. They want to become like the Queen. The Queen doesn't even admit that she owns all this stuff. They'll say she's only worth a few $100 billion. Complete nonsense. The Queen's offshore accounts, we know, have trillions of dollars in it because remember, 65% of the GDP of most of Europe and America goes into offshore accounts until recently. So what we have here is fantastic corruption and collusion. So now let me finish this story. The United States Enrichment Corporation, it is not United States, it's a private corporation, and it is not the only enrichment really going on was the enrichment of those people who bought into it early. And that was, again, insider trading of the people who got in and bought the early stock that before it goes to the IPO. That's the way all of this is done. Insider trading goes to the IPO. It goes into mega billions. They sell immediately.
So the word enrichment actually is the enrichment of their own pockets, not necessarily uranium.
You took the joke.
Oh,
that was my joke. I just didn't tell it right. Yes, it was for their own enrichment. It was for the enrichment of the very people who owned the 400 subsidiaries of Carlyle Group. It's the same people. The 50 top investors in the top Fortune 500 companies in America are all the same 50 companies. And when you look at who owned them, you won't find who owns them because they have, in some cases, 20 Blackstone companies, asset management, LLT, this, offshore. Okay, every single career politician has an offshore account if they're on a committee in the Congress. That's a fact. Why do I know this? Because they're all paid off. There are some that are so blatant, like John McCain, that he has a foundation that receives tens of millions of dollars. He doesn't even know where it comes from. He says he has nothing to do with it. But the other day he spent $1 million of it. He walked in, told him what to spend it on. So, you got John McCain is Russian collusion. That's Leonid Blavatnik. You got...
let's look at Mitch McConnell. I mean, he is from Kentucky. Certainly he knows what's going on in Paducah, and maybe he wants his cut because he's nothing but an obstructionist in the Senate. He's not doing the will of the people. He's doing everything but.
Washington, D.C. is a bunch of gangsters trying to become mafia dons, creating their own little circle of deceit and greed and trying to get their piece of the pie. I think I should do one on just the McCain's recent activities that are so un-American, and he thinks he's some kind of covert black ops CIA operative, and he's working with the Russians. Blavatnik has given the maximum amounts to many, many Democrats and to numerous anti-Trumpers. But is he ever going to be looked at as Russian collusion? He gave to their super PACs. He gave untold millions of dollars. And by the way, it's untold because super PACs really they're not honest. That is the way basically of campaign fraud now. And the Russians are pouring money into super PACs. For instance, Leonid Blavatnik sits on Gazprom, the largest gas company in Russia. But, oh no, that's right. He became a British citizen, and then he became a U.S. citizen. So he's not a Russian anymore, but he sits on the largest gas company, which has, of course, lobbyists like Tony Podesta. They represent them. John Podesta represented Russians. They represent the Russians in Ukraine. They represent Russians in Kazakhstan. They represent all of our criminals. And when Robert Mueller had Tony Podesta come in, and he probably will, he has to be indicted soon because he wasn't registered as a foreign agent when he lobbied for Ukraine and for VTB Bank in Russia and for Uranium One and for Arms Uranium when it had first bought 16% of Eurasia. He lobbied for Eurasia. They lobby for all of the corrupt people. It's just like Fusion GPS. And unfortunately, it's like Stone, Kelly, Manafort, and whatever the other fourth member is. Or it's like Davis and Manafort. The next guy they say going down is in Davis and Manafort because they worked for the group that they're saying the money was laundered, Manafort's money was laundered through. So they get these people for not filing as a foreign agent. They're going to get General Flynn for the same thing. They'll get his son for the same thing. They didn't file as foreign agents because those aren't our enemies. Turkey almost joined NATO. Would Flynn have to file as a foreign agent if he went and talked to someone in France? No. So, is Russia our enemy? No. So why did they use the excuse that they couldn't do the uranium deals and they had to have a corporate middleman under the Trading with the Enemy Act? It's not trading with the enemy. Russia is not our enemy. The only enemy we've had lately are the fake, anybody that George Bush Sr. or George Bush Jr. want to call a terrorist, or Obama, or anyone that Obama creates an alliance with to go bomb somebody. Well, those are our enemies because we just drop bombs on them. We don't even know why. Killing 2 million people for sure with the bombings, putting 55 million migrants into invasion mode for Europe. And that doesn't count the millions that Obama and Susan Rice killed in Africa. So presidents get involved in this and they set up their thing. Now, what happened? George Bush Sr. set up a rogue kind of CIA mafia don. You still have to kiss his ring if you're going to operate in Washington, D.C., because everyone is covering for him because everyone is involved.
Everybody's getting paid off.
Well, not only paid off, they don't even need to be paid off. They voted for this. What if I came out and named the senators who voted to give our uranium to Russia? What if we called them out as Russian spies because they are, and then we point out that fake U.S. citizens who are actually Russians keep them as career politicians?
Well, not to mention the dual citizens that all are in Congress. We just need to get rid of it all. My goodness, Thomas, are we ever going to see the light of day on this?
Oh, this is all the light of the day. This is the light of the day shining on the rats who are eating each other. And the ship is on fire. And soon they're all jumping off. And they have to jump off because they're all complicit with this. This goes back into the early 90s when these corrupt things were done. And it's the same group of people. I could go into these things in great detail, but let's just say that every one of the people, well, let's just name them: Larry Summers, John Podesta, David Kapos, Sheryl Sandberg, Uri Milner, the Russian, Alishar Usmanov, the Russian, who now they show that they owned huge parts of Facebook and it was practically insider trading, along with James Breyer, along with James Chandler. Let me just explain a little tiny thing as an aside here. When IBM wanted to leave this country, they met with those people that I just named. And they said, you can't do that unless we put a back door into any computer you sell to a foreign country. So they did. And that started what was then later turned into the IBM Eclipse Foundation, which stole Leader Technologies' social media technology, which became Facebook, Instagram. It was used in PayPal. It was used in Google as Google Mail, as YouTube. It's all the same program. Twitter, they're all the same program. Well, when that was stolen, that was one of the biggest patent thefts. We're talking
ever in ever history.
Trillions of dollars. Those very people, what happened to those people? James Chandler opened Eurotech and took that same technology into Europe and controls it to this very day. Uri Milner took that same technology and created Mail RU, Mail Russia. He controls that. He worked with Bank Minotep, and they did all kinds of fraud in buying up not only American companies that were turning into high-tech companies, which has now become revealed. And then he came, of course, to America, dropped even later. Let me just explain that. $500 million, $50 million of it was Goldman Sachs. $450 million was Uri Milner. Uri Milner had worked for Larry Summers, who was the president of Harvard, who had the social networking source code that then went to Zuckerberg. You see, that all happened in the same place. Uri Gelner was there. So was Sheryl Sandberg, who later became the key person in Facebook, in Google Mail, Gmail, in all of these things. It's all the same group of people. So then Larry Summers took it into America with IBM Eclipse Foundation and controls all those groups. And the back door to the NSA is in every one of them. And the source code is also in it for all inquiries that you do, what you would call a Google or an inquiry. That is all being 100% monitored. It was created as a weaponized form of social control, and it was supposed to be sent into foreign countries to spy on them. So it went into China through James Breyer, John Breyer, who's still there now and is a huge tech mogul. It went into Russia through Uri Milner, one of the richest men in Russia, but he has never had a sanction put on him. Isn't that a coincidence? We see his insider trading thick as thieves. Nothing happens to him. Then he comes later, sets up in Silicon Valley, throws 200 million more at Facebook, and, just says has nothing to do with it. But really, who is Uri Milner? He is an agent of Larry Summer who had worked with the World Bank. The World Bank is the United Nations. It's as corrupt as it can be. It's basically where the CIA controls the rogue CIA. In other words, the corporate CIA, ex-intelligence agencies who go into what I call rogue CIA, CIA standing for corporate imperialistic assassins. That's who these people are. They're the same thing as the Dutch East India Company, the British East India Company. At one point, the British East India Company was more powerful than Britain, Netherlands, and Germany, and most of Europe altogether. They had a bigger army, they had a bigger navy, and they came and took over America once it started to prosper, didn't they? And how did they do it? Through taxes, through manipulation. It was only 3% of Americans who stood up in the American Revolution. So folks, don't be discouraged. It only takes a few, 3%.
And if you're listening to this, you're one of the few, because not a lot of people can understand this big picture. It's so complicated. You're certainly not going to find this on the front page of the New York Times. And I know one of the paths that we could go down is looking at how Facebook was going to help rig the election for Hillary Clinton. And when they came out early and said, they were going to win, and they felt so confident, and you would see them on TV, you'd go, really, how did they figure that when Trump's rallies are so huge and the lines are around the block and Hillary has to have high schoolers bust into hers? So now we get it. They were going to rig the election, weren't they?
Oh, yes, but it started back with Obama.
Yes.
It started back in 2008 when Eric Schmidt started the Eric Schmidt Project, which was then turned by Obama into a U.S. agency called the U.S. Digital Service, which created a template for winning the election. And Eric Schmidt has now admitted that Google's algorithms were geared towards the Eric Schmidt Project, which then became literally a $1.5 billion secret office in the White House that was directly connected to Facebook, Google, the internet. In other words, this was the president's own NSA. And unmasking isn't necessary with this system. You can go and look at anybody at any time, whether their computer, their telephone, their TV is on or not. You can even use other devices. And this was a big joke when they said the other day, Kellyanne Conway said, they can use your microwave to spy on you. And then experts came out and said, yes, they can. The Internet of Things, if you have your microwave on it, it's a net bot, and any diaphanous surface can be used with those net box as a speaker and as a listening device. So yes, everything is listening to you if you're part of the Internet of Things, and this has always been their program. As a matter of fact, it was a Russian who wrote, a very famous Russian who's worked for Facebook and has continued to be a Russian. He wrote what was called the template for winning the election. This was very, very well known. So the Russian collusion goes far beyond the silly little report, the 15-page report created by the supposed all the 17 U.S. intelligence agencies that all 100% concur that Russians meddled. No, that was an old report. They doctored up. They simply used new statistics for Russia Today, the television network, and then they added a few nonsense statements about the DNC hacking, which we now know William Binney recently met with Pompeo and demonstrated to him that the DNC could not have been hacked. It was a leak, and it was probably taken by one of their own personnel who had direct physical access to the server.
So in your research with Uranium One, what other things did you uncover that perhaps our audience is not familiar with?
I'm so glad you brought me back to the topic.
Well, I did it gently, didn't I?
I know, because I'm going on, because I get, and then you
I
ask.
know, there's so many different ways.
When we talk about Russian collusion, I can talk to you all day about the Russian collusion. Anyone who didn't know there was Russian collusion doesn't know George Soros owns the Democratic National Convention through super PACs.
But
you would be an idiot. $200 million George Soros spent in the last 2 weeks before the election. He admitted this. He was on the news. He was proud to say that he had stolen the election with these, as we know, silent subliminal programming was in them.
But one name you're not going to hear with Russian collusion is Donald Trump.
No, Donald Trump was clean. The FBI did a complete study on him and his father and said he had no Russian collusion. As I say, Felix Sater has come up again and again, blah, blah, blah. But no, that was just a guy. Oh. That was a guy Trump worked with. But
Let's go
no.
back to Uranium One.
By the way, Trump would have loved to have connections with Putin. He wanted connections with Putin. As a matter of fact, Felix Sater took Ivanka and Jared to Moscow and lied to them, walked them around there and in the Crimea and in other places in Georgia and said, hey, let's build a luxury hotel here. And they went, yeah, let's do it. Why? Because Obama and Hillary said Russia was our friends. If you look at the Russian, okay, Hillary can just say, Uranium One. She didn't do anything more than take the same kind of contribution she took with the other $2 billion. So she can kind of get out of that because Obama, the 9 people on CFIUS, cannot stop Obama overriding them. The people on Homeland Security Intelligence Committee and Security Committee, they have one of these for the Commerce, for the Department of Defense, for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Obama had to go and override. He would have overridden all of them because he had already gone to the Congress and said, you will allow Putin to buy shares in Eurasia. You will now allow Putin to buy Uranium One from Frank Giustra. He forced this down the Congress's throat in 2010. So any of them...
Well, Congress could have stood up and...
They did.
And said no.
They fought him in 2008, wouldn't let him. In 2010, they fought him and he overrode it. He didn't ask for their permission. He just acted.
Oh, I see.
And when he acted, this is what happened. And this is the stupidest thing. This is the Clintons always making huge mistakes because of their greed, okay? In 2005, when Bill saw that in a few years, in 2014, the Daddy Bush deal with Russians having their uranium come to Paducah and become our uranium, as we didn't even dig up our own uranium. What a joke. We didn't use our own nuclear missile uranium. Oh, what a joke. So why would that happen? Only because he was enriching himself. And this happened for 20 years. It was $8 billion overtly. Some say the real costs are $20 billion because taxpayers paid for the Paducah gaseous diffusion plant to be refitted repeatedly. They paid for the cleanup of the one in Portsmouth, Ohio, because that's where they started it at. Then they went to Paducah. The one in Portsmouth has been cleaned up. Taxpayers paid for that too, billions. And now they say they want to, and this is great because unless you go to the government documents, they lie. They will tell you there's no uranium enrichment plants in America. No U.S. uranium enrichment plants in America at this point. That's true and that's a lie. They're not U.S. They're owned by, as I said, Britain, Netherlands, and Germany with a piece of it going to Canada. So they're not ours. We simply get the uranium from them. Where does that uranium come from? Well, here's what happened. The 20-year deal went down and Portsmouth, Ohio, and Paducah were used. But Paducah, at the end of the 20-year deal, went bankrupt. Now, how do you go bankrupt when you have a government contract with overcost runs into the billions and taxpayers are paying for it and you got to set it up and you got your piece of the pie? So how did the United States Enrichment Corporation go bankrupt and then immediately open up as a company called Centrus Energy? Let me tell you about them in just a second. But during the whole time, they scammed Americans and taxpayers through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, billions of dollars trying to turn the Portsmouth, Ohio plant into another enrichment plant after it had been decommissioned, cleaned up. And so now they put the estimates at $6 billion, and taxpayers are going to pay for that. So why? We can use uranium brought from Kazakhstan, cheated and lied and brought into Canada, enriched in Canada, brought into America, turned into uranium, turned into uranium-235 and then shipped back out illegally to Canada through a company that has the right to ship it by an illegal Russian trucking company, so that then that 38% can then go to our enemies. And literally it went to Europe. This is in their books. It went to Europe. It went to all throughout Europe and Asia. And they don't know where all of it went. But they do believe a good deal of it went to, and strangely enough, Syria, Iran, and some North Korea and other places. And North Korea has their own enrichment plant. Don't forget, Obama, with $4.5 billion, built the enrichment plant so that they could make uranium-239. You can only get a little bit out of nuclear power plants. You have to have a breeder reactor to create weapons-grade 239. The bombs that Kim, in North Korea, is saying he's going to send at us, take plutonium-239. Where are they getting that? We built it for them. Obama built it for them, folks. $4.5 billion. He built the weapons that we are being threatened with. And the more that Kim screams, the more he expects the presidents to continue the mafia deal and give them more money and say, shame on you, just like Iran. Shame on you for having centrifuge uranium-235 enrichment plants, Iran. Shame on you, France, for giving it to them. And shame on you, Pakistan, for stealing those plans. Shame on you, enemies of America, for getting what we know you have. And basically the technology came from us and our own allies. So it is a con game. There should be no nuclear weapons. There should be no nuclear facilities. Power plants, they should be thorium. They can be refitted very cheaply, and thorium is cheap. It's everywhere. It is a con game. We don't need any more plutonium-239. That's why we don't produce it here. We don't need any more uranium-235. That's why we don't really technically produce it here. We allow foreign governments to come in and set up our only uranium-235 enrichment plant in New Mexico, in Eunice, New Mexico, under the auspices of this National Enrichment Facility. National. Folks, when they say these things, read it opposite. It ain't national. It has nothing to do with America. Then they call it the Louisiana Energy Service. It has nothing to do with Louisiana. It is in New Mexico. And then when you look closely, you find that it's owned by a company called Urenco Incorporated, which you can't find jack about them except that they produce 29% of the entire world's the global enrichment service that they have produces 1/3 of the uranium for our enemies from our country, with uranium that didn't even come from us. In some cases, a little bit of it did, and I can explain that. During the 20 years that we used this program called megatons to megawatts, that's another name for that program. It's the standard name for it. 20 years, folks, we used supposed Russian uranium-235 to provide 11% of our electricity in America for 20 years.
Okay, you went down a list of everything that we don't need. There is something we do need. And tell us how this would work. We need some military tribunals to take care of these thugs. I cannot imagine that this will ever go through a regular court, that we can imagine.
Oh, you're going to get me off into the weeds on that one. You want me to go there?
Let's make this our concluding.
If you're in the military, you're working for the intelligence section. You make one mistake, you go to jail for the rest of your life. You get court-martialed. You might even it might be treasonous. You might die.
If you're the Secretary of State, aren't you?
She's not military. And if you're a corporate intelligence, which over 65% of our intelligence is done by private corporations, nothing happens to you. Nothing. You don't even get locked up. And if you're the Secretary of State, I know it's not right.
That's not right. How are we going to
Politicians
bring these people
they're not
justice?
Bound by
Well, since they've been breaking the rules, why don't we break the rules? No, that's not right.
The Uniform Code of Military Justice.
We have to stop this, Thomas. These people are murderous thugs. They're not only stealing our country of our wealth, they're stealing us of our children and future generations.
The reason that General Flynn was taken out is he said what I say, and we've said, the conclaves have said, my friends have said for a long time. End all corporate military intelligence. End all corporate mercenary soldiers. End all corporate involvement in the military, period. That would include Serco, GE, and all of the other corrupt companies like Motorola and the subsidiaries of Google. Those are all military. They all need to end. There can be no more corporate involvement in the military. Why? Because there are, just as you said, no rules to keep these people in place. Hillary was bound by no rules because she made sure not to sign anything. And if Donna Brazil produces a contract that Hillary signed, I will kiss your foot.
Y'all have said that since she's come out with this, and you said there's no contract. She will never produce that.
So going back, if you want to figure out right now why it's so friggin' important for Uranium One to be sold to the Russians, that Obama would go into Congress in a special meeting to chew them out, to make sure that this happened so his friend Putin could get that another uranium deal, because it gave them supposedly $20 billion. $1 billion a year we gave to Putin for uranium we didn't need, that went to enrich corporate interests that were set up by Daddy Bush. Okay. When Bill Clinton saw this, he set up his own. And this description is incredible. You're not going to believe this. But let's first go into the myth. The myth is, if nuclear was military, none of this would be happening. If it was a top secret security clearance, which it has to be for you to go into a nuclear power plant, you know how many people have top secret security clearances in America right now? Over 800,000. A lot of them are in the nuclear industry. A lot of them are in intelligence. A lot of them are in... They're mercenaries. They're working for Z or KBR or any of the Halliburton transformed mercenary groups out of the 400 groups that Carlyle Group used to control, Halliburton being one of the big ones. Halliburton has an intelligence system that is equal to our own military. Lockheed Martin has an intelligence system that's bigger than our, more powerful, more better equipment, and more efficient than ours. Why? Because they have stole hundreds of billions of dollars. And who was it that protected them? James Comey went over, worked for Lockheed Martin, and got them out of the trillions of dollars they stole. Also, they fake these fighter jets and the bombers. They say they're going to make a certain number. They don't. They get decommissioned. No one knows. That's where the trillions of dollars are going. It's not going into equipment. That $9.5 trillion missing at the Pentagon did not come up missing. It's not missing at all. It went into McDonnell Douglas, Lockheed Martin. It was on and on and on.
They're just conning us, and who's going to hold them accountable?
And these are corporations, and we allow them in to do things that should be controlled by the U.S. government strictly, and by people who are bound by law, and basically will be prosecuted for doing the things that are commonplace in the corporate industry. Why do you think Snowden, he was a corporate worker? You get these people who are allowed access to information they never, ever should have been allowed to. They're allowed controls. And what do? Once they work in the military or work in the government, then they go work for corporate, and they make... I was offered well over 10 times the amount of a normal salary when GE and Digital came to me when I got out of the NSA. Okay, I've had direct experience with this. Basically, they said, okay, then just set your salary, whatever you want. It doesn't matter. We have endless money, because these corporations are ripping us off everywhere you work. So this corporation, the National Enrichment Facility, complete uranium fraud. It's a con, folks. It ain't national. And it's enriching other people, not us. And then Urenco, as I said, when you look, they don't even do the work. Urenco isn't even in America. They use another company in America, another corporation. So this goes through multiple shell corporations. It goes to fake corporations. In the end, the Americans do the work anyway, but we pay a huge amount more. So we paid for this for the uranium in the megatons to megawatts. We overpaid for that. The taxpayers paid to have other countries uranium enriched. And now we still to this day give subsidies to the National Enrichment Facility, which I said you won't even be able to find out who owns them. They don't even exist, according to the records, unless you go very, 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 very deep. So who was it that enriched the uranium from Uranium One? That would have been the National Enrichment Facility. And so I'm telling you now, if the Russian oligarchs who were part of the transportation system that moved all this stuff around in America called Transportation Logistics International is in direct cahoots with a company that has the international permissions, RSB Logistics Service Incorporated, both located in Paducah.
Oh, Mitch McConnell's
It's
territory.
And it's also, which truck is whose? Whose uranium is whose? Oh, we don't even know. So we'll ship it out of the country. We'll do with whatever we want. We'll ship back in anything we want. And Obama will fight the U.S. Congress to make sure this happens. He'll fight to make sure Russia can buy the 16% of the country. He'll fight to make sure that Russia can buy 100% of the company. And this is how the company is set up. And what I'm about to tell you,
You're going to tell us something more?
is so sad.
Oh.
And it's so ridiculous. And this is the real story. In 2005, Bill Clinton and Frank Giustra went to Kazakhstan. There, they met Putin representatives and they talked about buying oil, gold, and uranium. At that point, Frank Giustra owned Gold Corp, and he owns another company called Fior. Fior, well, first off, let's just say Frank Giustra is a Canadian. He worked for Merrill Lynch. He went to England. He learned how to do security mining fraud at Yorkton Securities. He then created Fior Group of companies, and then Endeavor Financial, and then he started banking for mines, and he bought some mines and some oil fields in Colombia that were worth anything, and then magically they started to become worth a tremendous amount. And then he bought some bad gold mines, and then he became the fourth largest gold producer in Gold Corp. And then once he became so rich that he didn't know what to do with his money, one day he decided, what's better than gold? Uranium. So he bought a little teensy tiny uranium mine, which was never mined, and he called it Eurasia. Eurasia was founded in 2014 to 2007, Eurasia Energy Limited, and that then was 16% was bought because it was only created so that there could be this deal with Kazakhstan. So as I said, in 2004, he started Eurasia. In 2005, he and Bill Clinton went to Kazakhstan and they got this deal, and they met with Putin and they said, look, we believe we can buy 20% of the uranium in Wyoming, and that you're going to be able to continue your crazy deal with using Paducah, Kentucky to downgrade the uranium that America doesn't want. We're going to keep this deal going, and we're going to get a piece of the pie. This is the way it's going to go. We have to money launder, and we have to have lots of money so that we can fake this. But first off, we're going to create a dummy company called Eurasia. We're going to get a tiny piece of Kazakhstan uranium, which we will never mine, right? But that will then give us access to Putin, and they got access. And when they got the access, they said we can buy because we can seize this land. There's a 35-acre, two large ranches out in Wyoming that were private property that were seized for this deal. And so we're going to get them, and we are going to fake everybody out. We're going to allow the Russians to come in to do this deal because you are going to buy the Canadian company, and under the auspices of it being a Canadian company, you get to go in because you own the uranium, and because we're going to force Obama, or we're going to force the White House, let's call it. We're going to force the White House to make sure that they allow you to ship it in and out so that you can do the craziest mafia legal con deal ever done. It's going to look completely legal. So he says, okay, that's what we're going to do. So Putin went for it. Putin said, yeah, I'll take 20% of the uranium from Wyoming. What I need, though, is, I'm not really trusting you guys, so why don't I go ahead and buy 16% of your company? So Arms Uranium bought 16% of Eurasia. So Putin had a chunk already in this. That had to be approved by Obama and 16 different committees in the U.S. Congress. They approved it. So then what happened? They said, we got that step. Well, let's go the next step. Let's go ahead and start your work. And so they sent in Russians, and they started twisting the arms of all the corporations that own the nuclear power plants. And they started their corruption and collusion and money laundering before they even had the uranium. Why? Because there were already Russians in this country with the previous deal. And so it just continued right on seamlessly. But what people forgot is it went from Paducah to Eunice, New Mexico. And when they did that, there was a big problem because there were enrichment problems. In my opinion, the enrichment was that it was fake. The reason I say fake is Because I don't believe they ever changed it from uranium 235 or high enrichment to low enrichment. I believe that's a lie. And so it was just a continuation of the lie. And so this trucking company that was bringing it in to Paducah, and had been for almost 20 years, simply was going to start bringing in and out other things. Now, we get no uranium from Canada. So Cameco, the number one, which is owned by Canada, owned by the Queen, they own in Saskatchewan their uranium, third largest holdings of uranium in the ground, right? They don't enrich uranium in the country. Isn't that odd? And there's no reason for us ever to take the Uranium One or the previous uranium from megatons to megawatts across the border. There's no enrichment plant there. It has to be fraud. And now they've proven by the records, or at least it's been leaked, 38% of what was going across didn't come back, and it went to our enemies, and it was enriched. It was never supposed to be enriched. They were taking it over to refine it, not to enrich it. So if it was enriched here, and it left fraudulently, and it went to our enemies. And this is what it's all about. It's not even about the Russian-American deal, which has been going on for 20 years and then continued to Uranium One. It is about the fact of the fraud. It's about the fact that uranium is on the loose, and it's on ships going everywhere in the world, and Putin is selling it to the highest bidder. It's as simple as that. And that's what he did when he came here. So how did Clinton and Frank Giustra plan this? Oh, this is so beautiful. This is it's one of the most glorious of the Clinton shams and frauds. The second they got the permission, the second they got the agreement from Putin and his nuclear gang in Kazakhstan, they came back and they created a group called the Clinton Giustra Sustainable Growth Initiative. They say that they are in business to alleviate poverty in partnership with global mining community. Now, mind you, Frank Giustra owns Goldcorp, the fourth largest gold producer in the world. He's never given a dime to anybody in poverty. Okay? He never gave anything to anybody. And when you look at this, it's simply this is what the Clintons do. Now, let me explain. Giustra is on the Clinton board, but he is as a major player, but he's also a member of many of the other Clinton initiatives all over the world. So he has gotten in. The mining is just one part of it. He has a group called the Radcliffe Foundation, created in 1997, a long time ago, for disaster relief, economic development, and homelessness. What does that actually mean? Homelessness means human trafficking. Economic development means taking advantage and ripping off third world countries for their resources, oil, gold, uranium. And disaster relief, he gave $20 million personally to the Clinton Foundation for Haiti relief. And as we know, there was a small, little, tiny corrugated warehouse built that made clothes, and that's all the Clintons did there. But what else did we notice? Human trafficking on a huge scale. They were even caught. Clintons were caught in the human trafficking, red-handed directly to their foundation. One of their people was taking these girls and...
That's Laura Silsby.
Yes, this is a proven fact. Mm-hmm. So we know that Giustra was part of this, okay? So he's been part of all of it. And then he gave $10 million. He's given $31 million to some of the foundations, but to the... I'm going to save this for the last. He's given $31 million to a number of the Clinton foundations, and he's involved in all of them. $10 million to the Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative. What that means is Clinton went and leveraged the big pharma. He got the terribly exaggerated prices on AIDS pills reduced tremendously, got it at a good price, jacked it up again, and is forcing it on China, India, all of Africa. This is the same thing as the Bill Gates Foundation with immunizations and with big pharma and with particularly now Monsanto and big Agra. Oh, and what does he invest in now? That's right. His number one thing is big Agra. So Frank Giustra is trying to, again, just like the Gates Foundation and the evil pharma, the big pharma, they want to basically, I'm sorry to have to say it, they want eugenic policies put in place. They want to wipe out the populations of the earth and they want to extend their life. That's what they're all focused on.
Right, and they need to, because as we become more awake, there are more of us than there are them. So they're probably getting themselves pretty fearful now.
So what I'm saying is the Clinton foundations and initiatives, wherever one is started, that's because a past president with intelligence information from the 17 intelligence communities, because the past presidents get all the same intelligence
Well, certainly
for the rest of their life.
Certainly the intelligence agencies have told Donald Trump about all this, right? They would tell Donald Trump all of this that you've been telling him.
Absolutely not. I sincerely doubt Donald Trump knows this. I don't think anybody knows this. So what did the Clinton Foundation do? They simply looked at the big people ripping people off. So they said, oh, disaster relief, that's Red Cross. What did they do in Haiti? He came on, and it made me want to vomit because I was very sensitive and I could sense things in those days. And I knew he was lying. He said, don't send money to the Red Cross. Send it to the Clinton Initiative. We're going to take care of these people. They didn't help them at all. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of proof that they ripped them off. I mean, even what they had, which was nothing, they ripped them off. In terms of things they bought, parts of the land, infrastructures and stuff, it was destroyed. They bought that. Their friends bought that. That's what the Global Initiative did in the Haiti Relief Fund. Now, the International Crisis Group, which Juster gave, which is a Clinton group, $10 million, that is an intelligence group. They go and they are searching for crisis. They're these humanitarians, like they learned that from George Soros. George Soros sends in some humanitarian groups. That's his intelligence group. Nobody can kick them out. They're humanitarians. What are they really there for? International Crisis Group. They're supposed to relieve crisis. They create crisis.
Well, yeah, we call it in the South, they're up there stirring the pot.
They're stirring the pot. They are, and then they become scallywags and carpetbaggers after the crisis.
All funded by George Soros.
This is the George Soros trick. International Crisis Group means regime change.
Which is happening right here in America.
You know how many of these foundations the Clintons have? I just found they have like 25 more I didn't know of that they founded in Arkansas before they founded their false Clinton Library, which then turned into 20 different other initiatives and foundations. So what I'm saying is, no matter what you have, and this is mining, okay, so you can't name anything that is corruption that the Clintons don't have a money laundering foundation. And why do the big evil people give to them? It becomes an intelligence network to protect them.
Yeah, but they've all been blackmailed with pedophilia and human trafficking.
It's exactly what it is.
And
they go and they say...
satanic rituals and... Well, I mean, you have to have something to blackmail that many people. And you know what? So what? Everybody has an affair. That's not blackmailable. And you can't blackmail somebody because of their sexual preference. So you have to go for the really ugly stuff, and that's what they're doing.
And they have one for every single thing that is a mafia money control, from drugs to medical, to pharmaceuticals, to agriculture, and the one for mining with the man who owns the fourth largest gold producing company in the world, did the following. When he founded this company, he gave $2.35 million to the Clinton Foundation, which of course went directly to Hillary for her part. Then he took $100 million and put it in that foundation. Then he got Carlos Slim to put $100 million
New York
in.
Times.
Who owns the New York Times and is nothing more than a CIA. He's a CIA operative. He's a hangover from the Bush days down in Mexico, when all of the campaign finance used to come through oil money faked through Mexican oil companies. This is the reason that Nixon actually got impeached. And it's the reason that George Bush Sr. got elected, because he was controlling those funds. He put himself in that position. So what happened then next? Carlos put in $100 million. So there's $200 million in this foundation that's going to relieve poverty. They've never given a penny to anyone poor ever. They've actually done nothing. And on their page, when you look up the Clinton Juster Sustainability Growth Initiative, it'll tell you a different story. It has nothing to do with mining. But if you look closely, they're involved in all mining because they saw what the Queen did. The Queen owns Rio Tinto, the largest mining cooperative in the world. She owns the uranium market. They're trying to bust into the market, right? But they can't. The Queen owns the market, and Putin owns the second part of it, and he's a gangster, and they can't go anywhere without his help. So they had to enlist Putin, okay? So $200 million go into the foundation, and then what happens? Juster then says, half of the money that I earn from mining for the rest of my life, I'm giving to this foundation. You know, when all these mega billionaires dedicate money to a foundation that is a money laundering situation. That has, and then you look into what they're into. They're into eugenics. They're into killing people. They're into Monsanto. They're into wiping out entire nations. They're into regime change. They support the same things George Soros does. All the liberal groups that are into creating chaos, confusion, moral depredation, moral immorality, basically teaching immorality. That's what Hollywood is. Hollywood is a bunch of whores. Nobody gets a job there without being a whore. And if you didn't know that, then you're really, really asleep, folks. Pinch yourself, wake up. Hollywood is whores. They are the entertainment till you don't look at Washington, and the real dirty work goes down in New York City. That's the reason Trump is winning. He has taken Washington by storm as a wrecking ball.
And the NFL, I'm telling you, the NFL is toast now.
At one point, it was said that Donald wanted to own an NFL company, and they bashed him and said, no, you're not the right type of person. So they let criminals own it, who then bilk cities for billions of dollars in subsidies and many, many, many other things. The contracts with the U.S. government that no one even knows about connected to the NFL, both with the military and other such things, for advertisement. We pay the NFL to go onto their field and advertise to be American.
Go short on the NFL because they are all collapsing. And you look at the empty stadiums and you realize that those are customers. They're not paying anymore. They're not watching television. They're not watching the NFL. That's going to eventually affect the advertisers, which eventually affects the media. So it's like it's a 1-2 punch that this collapse of the NFL also takes down the media. Then those contracted players are getting millions of dollars. Well, their contracts, they won't be able to be honored. They just simply won't be, because where are the teams going to get the money when they don't have customers, they don't have the advertisers? It's in a free-for-all. So if you're a professional football player, you need to put your house on the market and start shoring things up, because baby, you're going down.
I've known numerous NFL players who had multi-million-dollar contracts, and the only thing common about them is that most of them were stupid. Stupid beyond belief. I predict that not one single NFL player, when they no longer have the income because the stadiums are empty, will not take a penny reduction.
Well, that's why they're going to have to, in the end, they'll just all go bankrupt.
That's why you're right.
No way to save the NFL now.
No.
So, folks, just sit back, because the real entertainment is not taking place in the game. It is taking place watching this whole industry collapse, along with now Hollywood.
89% of players who've played more than one season have brain damage. So why are we listening to them?
Okay,
I don't understand.
So we got way off the subject. We want to go back to Uranium
It's a con.
One, and let's wrap
NFL
it up.
is a gambling con. The number one gambling con in America is the NFL. The games have been thrown for decades, and the big games are all thrown, and the number one bet in Las Vegas is on NFL live games. Number two, fantasy football, y'all. This is gambling. It goes down into the family. They want to teach the whole family to gamble, and that gambling's okay. It's a con, just like the Russian nuclear annihilation, a con. Russian uranium, it's a con. Did we expect the largest mafia country in the world to not come in here and do what they've always said, which is undermine us through our own stupidity, our own lack of paying attention? There were 10 spies in at the same time that the company, by the way, megatons to megawatts, 10x was the company. What's the company for Uranium One? 10x. What's their company in America? 10am. That's the same exact people that have been doing this for over 20 years. This is nothing new. This is a con game that presidents play so that they can get their piece of the pie. And the Congress allows it because every one of them has to get money for their next election, okay? Except for Rand Paul.
Now, this is war. And in war, you have to step up and do your part. And the things that you can do is not go and watch the football games. Don't buy their tickets. Boycott Hollywood. What else can we do to put a pinch?
We need to do a, what do you call it? We need to get 70,000 signatures to say that nuclear power needs to be turned into thorium power.
Why should I have to do a freaking petition? Why can't Congress do its job?
They're all corrupt gangsters, criminals.
And so what is a petition going to do? I say we got to go into these midterms and we have to get all these establishment Republicans out of there.
There is no such thing, I will repeat this, as a congressperson on a committee that does not have an offshore account. They are all bought and paid for by big oil, big pharma, Big Agra,
So they just sit there and
Monsanto.
spin with these intelligence or these committee meetings. If you notice, they never go anywhere. Where are they going? All they're doing is getting us involved, thinking it's going someplace. It never does. Trey Gowdy, where are you taking us? Show us a freaking result of what you're doing.
Well, let's look at this. They've demanded an investigation on Uranium One. What will come from it? Well, if they don't investigate themselves, then they didn't do an investigation.
They could do that.
How about the Select Intelligence Committee in the House investigating Trump's Russia hacking when they had or the DNC hacking when the very people who controlled their accounts are the ones who actually got the leak from the DNC. They can't investigate Imran Awan because he worked for them. They're all thick as thieves, and there is a law among thieves where they protect each other. So let's just wrap this up. Here's what's happening. This is a con game. Okay, Hillary Clinton is not totally responsible for Uranium One. She's responsible for getting all those payoffs, but her husband got bigger payoffs. He got $200 million in payoffs. She only got $152 million. So in this particular, she got $152 million. So he got bigger payoffs than her, and it still continues to this day, and it's going to continue. Why? Because U.S. Enrichment Corporation went bankrupt. They've now been turned into Centrus Energy. Centrus Energy already has a no-bid contract to dismantle the U.S. nuclear arsenal. Who are those people, folks? That's the military-industrial complex working with Russia, working with the mafia, Russian mafia right here in our country, and they are going to now scam us more, and yet we're going to create uranium that is snuck into this country. It's not even our uranium anymore. It's snuck into this country from Kazakhstan and from Canada. And the reason that that Obama said it had to go to Canada because that's where Frank Juster's company was. Frank Juster doesn't have any uranium activities in Canada. He didn't need to take it over there. He has no connections to uranium in Canada. There's no reason that the uranium would need to be taken to Canada and back. That's a lie. The only reason was for the fraud. So what is happening? It's going to continue until the Clinton Foundation is collapsed, and then that will collapse the Obama Foundation, which is doing the same exact thing right now. We could talk about that.
No, let's not in this audio.
Ad nauseum because of what they have done. And what are they doing? They're following the Bush example. This is nothing more than White House presidents, remember, using executive privilege and executive power. 4.5 million to 5 million federal employees work directly for the President of the United States. With that much power in the military and intelligence, in commerce, in treasury, you better be able to take over the world. And so when you have that much power and you want to leave office, you need to set up something that is going to take care of you for the rest of your life. Clinton brought in illegal $2 billion. Well, Daddy Bush, 1 year after being the president, went from a millionaire to a billionaire. Fantastic. George Bush, baby Bush, they bought Paraguay. They bought the largest freshwater reserves, second largest freshwater reserves underground in the world. They have bought things that you can't imagine. They have bought practically entire nations with the money they have. Okay? So that's what that president did with it. What is Obama doing with it? He is now on his 7th compound that we're paying for. He already has taken $10 million he stole from the DNC, because we heard Donna Brazile said that he left them bankrupt, but he had $10 million left in his account, which in his campaign fund, he took it and turned it into the Organizing for Action, which is nothing more than a militaristic group that fed the deaths that created by Black Lives Matter and Antifa. But it's also basically a political Marxist Lewinsky. Saul Alinsky. Boy, there's a transcription, a transposition. Saul Alinsky. Basically, that's all that was. They were training them, and what did they do? 32,000 of them were supposed to go on the street, and we had Loretta Lynch saying, "Go on the street, violence. Some may have to die." There was recommendations that people should go out and die for the cause. For Black Lives Matter, which said you should kill white policemen. And in the end, they said kill all policemen, black policemen also. So it was white policemen on black young men, unarmed. And then it was All policemen.
Well, that's the Cass.
Isn't that interesting?
That's the Cass Sunstein method. They nudge you. First, it's Black Lives Matters. It's black versus white, and then they get to their real thing. They don't want law and order in the country, so now it's all cops, black and white. Nudge, a little bit at a time. And folks, we've been nudged for the last 20 years directly by these folks, and we got to stop and create our own emotional, psychological, and political wall. Build it.
Here's the bottom line, and this is my closing statement.
Okay.
I know, it's hard to believe.
Close it.
When the Chicago Mafia, remember, Hillary Clinton's dad was Hugh Rodham, who was second in charge of the Chicago Mafia. And when Valerie Jarrett, working for the Daily Machine, total gangster corruption of Chicago, hired Michelle Obama, and then...
Was that when Michelle was Michael, or was that when she was Michelle?
That's after the operation. Yeah.
Okay. But we don't know that there was an operation.
Well,
From
I'm
what
giving
I
her,
see.
I'm giving her credit for an operation.
I don't think
but
so.
Of course, she didn't operate on everything, because we know that we know that Barry Soetoro likes guys, and that's a fact.
Well, then we did it. We got our first...
well, let's not go there. Okay, see where you led me? So,
yeah, sorry.
When the mob moved to D.C., and Valerie Jarrett, who had more security protecting her than the president had protecting him, why? Because she's the mob. What don't people understand? That's who told Barack what to do, and she got her direct commands from George Soros. Remember, it was George Soros who chose Barack, Barry Soetoro, over Hillary Rodham, Chicago Mafia daughter, okay? So that was George Soros. So what is really happening here? It isn't an issue of uranium. It's an issue of the mob, the mafia, the Russian mafia coming in and taking over the Chicago transformed into DC gangster mob. These guys are mobs. They don't even have any finesse. Every week there is a new crime that Obama did that is coming out to the tune of billions of dollars, because it was all set up for the mob queen herself to take over America, and for Bill Clinton, who, as we can see by his corruption in every single one of his foundations, which is really just a way to put rechannel the flow of money in the way that the mob and gangsters do. That's what they do. They find the flow of money, they muscle into it, they leverage it, they get it to flow to them. And then they keep the flow going. They don't want to end the flow. They don't want to kill it. So uranium, we have to keep this Cold War going with Russia, because the money we're making off uranium is keeping Vlad the Impaler afloat. It is keeping Russia alive. So we have to remember, Uranium One isn't about uranium. That's a deal between presidents of the U.S., Russia, and China. The deal is that the Chicago, Washington, D.C. mob got outflanked by the FBI, CIA, NSA mob, who are really a cartel working for the presidents, who basically take control of our country and don't let us have it back. And so they had to call in Mueller, the guy who carried the uranium to Putin, so that Putin could say, yeah, this is good enough uranium. I'll go ahead and do the deal with y'all. Who sent him? Hillary. That's the corruption. That's what Hillary won't get out of. That's what Mueller won't get out of. Rod Rosenstein, Obama, and unfortunately, hundreds of people in D.C. And that's the reason this is so huge.
Thousands.
Everyone who communicated with Hillary Clinton at that time on her unsecure line committed a federal crime. If you were in the military, you would go to jail for as long as they want. But since these are corporate or political interests and people, nothing will happen unless the Department of Justice is cleaned up and we actually get some lawfulness, some rule of law going on in the Department of Justice. And if the FBI basically needs to be closed down and reconstituted along with the NSA, and the CIA must be closed completely, because all of these deals are international deals. Every one of them was struck by the CIA. That's why they had to go through a middleman corporation, because it is illegal to trade in uranium with the people you're pointing the missiles at. So don't get upset, folks, about the missiles. That's because you were asleep. Get upset about the Clinton corruption, because there is no end to it.